I think my favorite line in this song is when he talks about the video game owning him. And that line can be taken so many different ways. And think about the things that I learned in the late 80s and 90s about the relationship between our physical manifestation and what appears to us as our electromagnetic infrastructure. There was this relationship that Rudolf Steiner believed was evil because there was no way to perceive the magnetic effects. And so he considered magnetism and electricity and light like polar opposites. He considered it the difference between good and evil. And I don't see it that way. I think that they're components, they're inseparable. Just like you can't have darkness without light, you can't have light without something to contrast it to. And so the relationship there, I think, is even more intimate between the electrical force and the magnetic force and our perception of light. And I think sorting that out is the key to understanding the higher forms of good and evil, I guess, as they manifest in our world. But so when he says that, the video game owns him, and he could be talking about the industry, the music industry, the making videos, but he's talking about the video game that says play me, put your quarter in here, and how that was the arcade days, when arcades were really common. And I remember going to arcades and playing video games. Little did I know some of the darker movements, the very real darker movements that were happening underneath of that mechanism. And when I came to understand these and learn these, it became, in a sense, the source of some particular abilities, conscious abilities, some of them which most people are seem to be completely incapable of on most levels, but are nevertheless a lot of times wrapped up in or involved with, because they have this relationship with these machines, and usually it's just the serial, very superficial, oh, this is entertainment for me, I'm going to learn to play the guitar with Guitar Hero, this, that, the other. They don't really usually consider the mechanisms that allow the game to be, that allow that game to exist. They don't consider the mechanisms that underlie the technology. And so this is where I find such interesting ground with connecting to these other sorts of you would say intelligences, mechanisms, but there's definitely a lot at work and play, in the development, in the evolution of these devices, and the relationship they have. He talks about the flow down his spine. He gets very graphic, just like I got in Down on the Ground. I covered the same ground in Down on the Ground that he seems to have covered there, and you get that sort of awakening, someone might say. But then you have to classify that. You have to say, well, if it's that, and we know about that, then Rudolph's arguments come into play in a very, very serious way, because there's that issue of consent, there's that issue of knowledge, and this light and dark play becomes a sort of almost black and white, right and wrong, good and bad, good and evil. And so that's a very difficult one, and I don't know how many people that are subscribed to my channel are even going to get that, or even going to understand what I'm saying about that. It's heavy stuff. It's heavy, heavy stuff. huge challenge for our culture and our world, especially as it relates to our sovereignty, our freedom, our sovereignty. And so that's the subtitle for Soldiers of the Future. The subtitle for the Soldiers of the Future are they're fighting for their minds, and that's the main thing the movie is about, the play, whatever it turns into. It's a saga. It's huge. It's way bigger than Star Wars, and you could easily get 6 parts out of what I've done so far. But I'll say more about it later. But it's not something that I think a lot of people are wondering about it. I want to go ahead and say this too. A lot of people are wondering about it because of some of the other stuff I've done. It's not a gay story. It's not something that is along the same lines as some of the other stuff that I've done. It's a pretty straightforward boy meets girl kind of story, and I don't know if I'm gonna put a gay character in it or not. There's gonna be, some appeal for anyone that's interested in cybernetics, and anyone that's interested in technology and the future of technology as it relates to our development, as our evolution. But it's not it's not pornographic, and it's definitely not a gay story. And so it's a superhero story. It's a sort of story about heroes, and right now there's 7 or 8 of them. And even the villains aren't necessarily bad. They're villains. They're real villains in Soldiers of the Future, but the villains are mostly just misinformed, misguided. They don't have good guides. Generally, they don't know about the things that are guiding them. They don't understand the things that are sort of pushing their buttons, and so they end up doing things that they wouldn't necessarily have done. And so it's pretty typical in that sense. But it's an interesting project, and it's something that I would have abandoned completely, probably, if I'd gotten a better response from astrotometry. But I think it's really sad and telling about our culture and our world that 1,300 people have watched the video on hurricane prediction, and not a single person from NOAA or NASA who's actually identified themselves as such has contacted me about it. And they've got to know that what I'm saying is correct. They've got to have figured out by now that it is what it is, and that's not going to change. They can't deal with the implications. They can't deal with the implications that our worldview, that the view that we adopted with Galileo is wrong. That Newton's gravity, the theory about Newton's gravity, has to be qualified very carefully. And she moves in mysterious ways.